Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you our quick recap of last night's school board meeting. And when I say quick, it was a long board meeting last night, and so it might be a little longer. We'll see. We'll try to get our way through it. But Heather, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good today. Thank you.
You have two high schoolers who just started at Washburn. How is it being the mother of two high schoolers?
So far, so good.
Yeah. No drama, no early, nothing.
Easy peasy. I saw we got to be at a school this morning, you and I did, and we I saw a young mama there with a newborn who looked so tired, and I was like, it's hard to have bigs and I miss my littles, but it's fun to sleep through the night.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Cool. So Heather, why don't you start us down with or start us with the rundown from last night's board meeting?
Yeah, so last night we started our board meeting with public comment. There was a lot of public comment. One theme that I think it's important to highlight was that we heard from Wellstone teachers and a student, and along with some student quotes about the lack of quality of lunches that they are having in their new space, and it sounds like something that the district needs to look into. We heard a superintendent report from interim superintendent Rochelle Cox. She talked about the first few weeks of school and where we're at. We heard from some staff on that as well. And then we got an enrollment update. Then there was a human resources update with Kendra Bennett. She talked a little bit about some of the struggles and highlights that their department is going through. There was a strategic plan update from Executive Director Sarah Hunter. Then there was a share out of the MCA and access data, which was bleak, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Um, there was a conversation about ESSA identified schools, and ESSA is what, Kenneth?
Every Student
Every,
Succeeds Act.
yes, that's right.
And so
Um,
just really quick, yeah. So ESSA is like the new federal education law that was put in place, I believe, in 2015 that replaced No Child Left Behind. And so ESSA identified schools are schools that um, Minneapolis Public Schools receives funding from MDE for kind of to provide additional targeted support because they are identified for for several different reasons. They could be identified for needing support, and so yeah, that we walked through that presentation and heard what schools were identified for support.
yeah. And then we heard a summary of the EDIA, and that's an equity and diversity impact assessment process that community members and staff go through together to look at the impact of policies or practices in our district. And this one was on private fundraising. And there was some findings that were there. And then we heard from Chair Ellison about her layout and her proposal for a superintendent search for a new superintendent. So it was a long meeting. We did not leave that boardroom till 9 o'clock.
Yeah, so it went into the early night. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that was covered between the data share and the schools that are identified for support. Like that is a big conversation and a big deal.
Yep.
The EDIA, which we aren't going to talk too much about today, but that share out was really important on school fundraising and talking about the inequities that are created through school fundraising, and especially because we Minneapolis public schools and all public education doesn't receive enough funding.
Hmm.
And then going into how this board is going to pick a new leader for this district. Like those are huge, huge conversations that took place. So given all of that, actually, that meeting could have been a lot longer, given how important all those topics are. So with those important conversations, we broke our rule. We have 3 slides of the night instead of our usual one. And so I'm going to walk us through them briefly here. So the first one is sharing the MCA data on reading. And so, this is not good for the district. Looking at, less than 20% of our Black, Brown, Indigenous students are reading at grade level. Last night, Executive Director Sarah Hunter said that a vast majority of the students for the first time in a few years actually took the MCAs last year. And so they feel comfortable saying that this is a representative sample. Past years, the district has used FAST data to kind of get a sense, give a sense to the board where students were at. But using the MCAs is reflective of at least the statewide testing that took place. And so this is all proficiency data, but this is where we're at as a school district, as a city, in terms of reading. Less than 1 out of 5 Black, Brown, and Indigenous students are reading at grade level in our district right now. And that is very scary. That is a real challenge. We cannot gloss over that. And I've seen a little bit of chatter last night or during the board meeting last night, and then also online about we don't want to just study the problem. We want to, address the problem, address the issues. And that is all fine. I do think it's actually appropriate for us to continue to sit with this data and be moved and uncomfortable with it, because I don't think enough people totally understand what this means. Meaning what this means to have 1 out of 5 students reading at grade level, for if you're Black, Brown, or Indigenous, right? That is a very scary proposition for these families, for these communities, right? And so I don't want us to gloss past it. I think we do need to sit in it, because we keep just glossing over it and then not figuring out exactly the scope of the problem and what is wrong. So yeah, this is really hard. This is really disappointing. I do want to commend Executive Director Sarah Hunter for sharing this data and giving it the time and space it needed in order to breathe. But yeah, this is gut wrenching. This is disgusting, and no one should be comfortable with this, and no one should be trying to explain this away. 1 out of 5 is bad. Is bad, horrendous. I don't know, Heather, do you have anything that you want to share with that?
I think I would just say you could feel that in the room. There was a heaviness in the boardroom last night. I also really appreciated the real honesty. As a parent in this district, I've sat through many meetings, right? I mean, let's be real. We've sat through many meetings where academic data was not what we were promised. And they in the beginning of a new rollout or a new initiative or a new curriculum. I did for myself appreciate the transparency and the honesty and the real owning of this presentation last night. It was I think it was refreshing to not feel like, oh, but by the way, here's this shiny new thing over here that's going to fix it all tomorrow, because we all know that's not reality. So it was heavy and it felt honest.
Yeah. So I'm gonna share the math slide because the data is worse, and we also need to acknowledge that we need to sit in that. 31 out of 3 students in Minneapolis public schools is doing math at grade level. 1 out of 3. 1 out of less than 1 out of 10 Black, Brown, Indigenous students are doing math at grade level in Minneapolis public schools. This is a crisis. This is the only thing that we should be talking about in this school board race, in this city, in whatever, right? This is as scary as it gets for the problems that we have in this society, in this community, in this city that need to be solved by these young people. Only 1 out of 10 Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks are doing math at grade level right now in Minneapolis public schools. When we're talking about a superintendent search, we have to be talking about who is turning this around. So, this is a real issue that this district has to figure out, that we collectively all have to own, right? You and me, Heather, we have to own, what is our role? What is our organization's role in that, right? All the other partners, all the unions, all of the district administrators, all the principals, all the elected officials, we have to own this and figure out what are we going to collectively do? How are we going to stop fighting amongst ourselves and start actually finding solutions to address this issue, center this issue, and figure it out? because our
Yeah.
students deserve so much better. They didn't ask for this.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that is slide of the night 2 for me. Um, and I'd say, and so I'm going to shift gears a little bit for slide of the night 3 because I think is important just in general for community members who care and are paying attention and want to know, which is our superintendent search process. And so last night, Chair Ellison proposed this superintendent search timeline and process to really figure out, what the current board is going to do to set up the new board to make a selection of a new superintendent. And so basically, how she broke it down last night and proposed this to the rest of the board was that this current board would help figure out the candidate profile for the new superintendent by selecting a community engagement consultant and starting the process of putting together doing community engagement to create a candidate profile. So then the next board, including so with 4 current school board members and then 5 new school board members, will then have the opportunity to work with community to actually solicit recommendations, applications from superintendent candidates all across the country, and then select one, hopefully by March or April of 2023. So this is outlining that essentially 8-month process. And yeah, I don't know. There was a big discussion about this last night. Also, Heather, I definitely have thoughts that I want to share, but I've been doing a lot of talking, so I want to pass it off to you first.
I just think this is a very important decision. There are real timelines, right? There's like I felt in myself this tension of like we need to not rush this process because we need to make a good quality hire. And the reality is that quality candidates are looking for jobs by March and April. And so, right, so there's
Looking to
going to
be
be
hired by March or April.
yes, thank you. Yes. And so there's going to be some tension throughout this process that I felt for myself. I don't have easy answers. It was helpful to me to see this layout. Um, and I mean, you and I went back and forth about firm or not firm, and what do we do, and what does community engagement look like, and all of those things. The reality is this board and the next incoming board, which we have been saying all along, these are big decisions that are coming that are going to impact the next 5 to 6 years and the lifetime and of Minneapolis public schools. And so if ever there was a time for parents to pay attention, um, I would encourage my fellow MPS parents to pay attention.
Yeah, I just want to say that, this decision is by far the most important decision that any school board ever has to make. Director Arneson said it last night. This is their
Good.
most important role um, as a school board is to select the leader, the CEO, whatever of this organization, of this nearly billion-dollar, $500 million organization that educates 30,000 students in Minneapolis, right? Like that is what this board is being asked to do. I I have real concerns about how this board is going to do it with one board member who's only one board member of the 9 who will have been through a superintendent search
Mm-hmm.
before. We'll have some board members that will be starting this process within their first week of being on the board. We'll have some board members who've been on the board for 2 years and one board member who's been on the board for 6 years. And then we have Director Ellison as the only one that's actually done a superintendent search before. And so, um, you know, and I thought some of that came out last night, just on how young and inexperienced this board is actually, and having a real concern about, if this board is going, if the next board, this board, the next board is going to be able to actually do this well enough to recruit and select a high quality superintendent. And also to like figure out what to politicize and what not to politicize. Yes, Minneapolis Public Schools has habitually not done community engagement well. And also, like, we might need to start to throw out the term community engagement because we actually need to define what community engagement means. Like, what are we looking for when we're saying like we need more community engagement. What does that mean? What does that look like? I know there are concerns about that during public comment. I have a concern about how engaged the community is going to be, but I also need to figure out for myself like what level of community engagement are we asking for? How do we want the community to be engaged if this process here doesn't effectively outline that in developing the candidate profile and having community representatives on top of the board being part of narrowing down the applicants, right? Like where else, how else do we want to see community engaged? And I think there are opportunities for that, but I don't think we can also say that we can effectively trust these next 9 people who are going to be on the board to I, to do this process without a firm, without any outside support, because we didn't. I don't think we collectively as a city picked these school board members because we know that they know all of the best superintendent candidates from across the country. Like that is not the criteria that people generally vote on, and so I doubt that they have the capability without the additional support to actually pick a high quality executive without that additional support. Um, and so I just don't think we need to politicize some of these things. We don't need to make some of these things an issue. This is an opportunity to learn. There's an opportunity to figure this out. And with but I many in Minneapolis we just love to argue for the sake of arguing, and like we don't we this is not the time to do it. We just looked at this data. It's too urgent to have petty fights over things we don't need to have petty fights over. And so I don't know. I
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that, and I think what I realized last night in the room was that we have lots of big problems to solve, and we have very little trust in the institution we're asking to solve it, right? So if every time we heard the request for community engagement, we replaced it with "I'm worried" or I don't trust that you're going to hear me in this process, and I don't trust that what we are going to do will actually benefit the group of students we chronically underserve, right? That it's like, so then what? And I think that that tension was alive and well in the room last night. I do worry that an outside firm, right, is not going to listen to the very families and students that we need to be listened to in order to serve them better. I do worry about that. And we have a timeline and there's systems and processes, and we need to hire like the CEO of this company that has big problems to solve.
right. And yeah, I get that concern. I don't think that this is a I don't I'm just saying I'm not saying that that this is a petty fight to have a conversation about community engagement or to question the validity of a superintendent search firm, right? Like those are questions to have, but I also don't want us to be distracted by the small things when we need to be thinking about like
Yeah.
how are we going to actually identify a superintendent candidate that can actually turn around some of this data, right? Like how do we do that, right? Like that is the conversation that I want to know. That is the conversation I think we need to have. But if we're going to say we need more community engagement in order to get there, what does that look like? And I'm not saying again that community needs to come up with a solution or a school board member on the spot needs to come up with a solution, but I'd love for us to be able to like constructively have that conversation to say like we saw this data, we know what that means. How do we actually create a community engagement process that identifies a superintendent candidate that gets to this? That I'm cool with. But we just love to have these arguments amongst each other, with the world, and like that's not productive if we're not actually going to get a superintendent candidate that can solve these issues because we're so busy trying to figure out whether or not we've done enough community engagement or the right type of community engagement. But then there's still going to be a handful of stakeholders that say I wasn't heard. So I don't know. This is again getting longer winded, but I do think it's an important discussion to have because this is an important decision that has to be made. So yeah, anyway, with that, let's go to our do better moment and our most valuable moments. Let's start with our most valuable moments to integrate a little positivity before we close, before we just keep getting going down this road of concern. So, Heather, why don't you kick us off with your most valuable moment?
So my most valuable moment goes to an interaction that uh, Director Caprini had with Executive Director Sarah Hunter. One of the things that this administration talked about when they talked about schools was this idea of this group of people called a PLC, a professional learning community, right? So this group of people is going to be in each school and at grades, and they're supposed to like look at the data, make plans, help teachers get better, and all of these kinds of things. And so I both appreciated really understanding who is on a PLC team, what that looks like, how they're supposed to meet, when they're supposed to meet, what does it look like for high school versus a third grade classroom or a third grade team. And then what Director Caprini asked, which was like, so what are we going to do about the schools that aren't doing this? Because I've been in schools where this isn't happening. This is a great theory and I like it. And then Director Hunter gave answers, Executive Director Hunter gave answers back that said, like, you know, a board should be looking for this, this, and this. And here's what we're actually trying to change to make sure that that is happening and that there is more accountability. And here's what that looks like. I, as a parent, felt like that interaction taught me a lot about, let's say I'm on site council at my child's school. I now have a lot more information about what to be looking for and asking about. And to me, that is what a school board meeting also should produce, is a real understanding of like, what does this look like if everybody's doing their role well, and what are we going to do when and if they're not? Because certainly with the data that we saw, we know that we cannot all be doing this well.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was a positive insight and conversation. It won't make a headline or anything like that, but I do think, starting to see some of the culture shifting around like how does what we're talking about in the boardroom translate to what's happening in the classroom, I think
That's right.
is starting to take place a little bit more over these last few meetings. So I appreciate you highlighting that one. My most valuable moment actually goes to I guess specifically Tyrese Cox and Kendra Bennett um, during the superintendent update. I thought they both did a great job of sharing, being honest and transparent with some of the struggles and the issues to start the school year, but also then being, then also sharing the progress that they are making in addressing some of those issues, right? So we all are very clear and know a lot about the staffing shortages and the incredible burden that puts on educators, other staff in the building to try to figure it out and make it work because students are still showing up every single day, right? And I thought Senior Officer Bennett of HR, she did a great job of really outlining like, here's what we're doing, here's what is going on, and we're going to be making staffing adjustments earlier in the year to help compensate and figure out, so that we don't wait so long and make schools continue to struggle. I thought that was an important thing. And I thought Tyrese Cox did a great job. Executive Director Tyrese Cox did a great job of identifying like, hey, here are some of the changes that we're seeing in schools in terms of populations. We're having a lot more students show up than we anticipated, which by the
Big
way is a
problem.
great thing. And now we have to do a lot of work in partnership with HR to figure out how we staff those schools appropriately. And so I think that, that was an important kind of tone shift for me to hear last night, especially with under Superintendent Rochelle Cox's new term. Because I think to start, it was all like really positive, really. And this was the first meeting where we had to
Yeah.
get a little bit more grim and had to get a little bit more real. And I was worried about the ability to actually get there. And I thought that they did, and they were still able to say, like, and here's what we're doing, which I don't know if we've always heard that either. Whether they were, I mean, sometimes they were doing it before, right? But they just didn't always share that. So I thought it was important to hear that.
So, kind of along those lines, I would say my do better moment, I really appreciated Director Cerrillo. So, we look at this data, right? And we're talking about academics. And Director Cerrillo asks the question, as the guardian of a Minneapolis public school second grader, what do I do?
I think seventh grader, but yes.
Oh, okay. Yes,
Yeah.
seventh grader. She said, "What do I do? What do I do with this information? How do I know if this is my child, and if it is, what do I do with that?" And I would say the that is a question I have wanted to see asked as a parent in this district. I would say very often you leave a parent teacher conference with a sense of like, here's some sheets and here's their best work and everything else, but you really don't leave with a sense of like, this is what they don't know yet and this is what they need to know in order to like be successful in the next grade. um, I did not hear Director Cerrillo get an honest answer for that. And I also, as an MPS parent, have not received an honest answer for that. I will say that in our first few nights of homework around here, it is clear that the pandemic, I'm not going to just lay everything at a school's feet. The pandemic really affected, I think, the ability for us to feel like we're reviewing, making sure students are ready for the next grade. But I was not communicated with clearly, right, in a way that like, here's what your children didn't get from our institution that they need to do well in ninth grade. I didn't get that. I didn't hear
Hmm.
Director Cerrillo get that answer. That would be my feedback is I think that we can trust the parents of this city with a real set of information for our students, because I will say I would not go to sleep at night if I had a real sense of understanding of how far they were. I probably would have been shown up very differently at school last year had I understood that, and I would be willing to say that many parents in this city, if they really understood what that meant and what they could do about it, and if they were in actual partnership with teachers, um, we would not accept that data. We would not accept that data. And so I don't think we should. And I think that our district does a real disservice and a real, and when we talk about community engagement, this is an opportunity for community engagement. Community engagement looks like making sure parents know what their kids need and making sure that they have that in real time. Like, what do I do with, this far behind? Give me the packet of skills that they are lacking so that I can go get them elsewhere, because I certainly want to make sure that my kids have that, and I know other parents do too. So I think like community engagement is not soft spoken happy parent teacher conferences when that's our data.
You know, I
That was my turn to be long winded.
no, I was just thinking like, yeah, and this is what I meant earlier about like we need to throw out the term community engagement. Like, let's just define what we want to see in the engagement. That's all I want. That's all I want. And so anyway, I don't want to be.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
I just think like let's be specific then around what we actually want to see, because um, clearly us continuing to just say community engagement to the district is
Mm.
not a successful strategy for the last 15 years. So anyway, um, my do better moment. Okay. My let me calm down because I've already been riled up a little bit. All right. So my do better moment um, is the intentional attempts to like mislead the public
Mhm.
around some of these issues that we're facing as a district. Last night we heard a school board member, we heard a couple of school board candidates go to the school board meeting and speak publicly and say that, first of all, multiple things that are incorrect. The first one being that we are losing all of our students to charter schools. That is factually incorrect. We actually lose most of our students to surrounding districts, whether it's Robbinsdale, whether it's Richfield, whether it's Columbia Heights, Edina, Bloomington, right? Like whatever, right? Like those are who we're, St. Paul, Roseville, like those are who we're losing students to. And so if we keep trying to trick the public, if we keep misleading the public around charter schools being the thing that's actually eating up all of our resources and taking all of our students away from Minneapolis public schools, we're actually going to continue to miss the mark on what the problem is. And the
Mhm.
problem isn't that that charter schools are better or worse at recruiting students or better or worse at in educating students or whatever. The problem is that our students are leaving everywhere, and we need to name why. And I thought Director Elamine did a good job last night around asking, like, when are we going to get more data about why students are leaving, why staff are leaving? Um, but we can't continue to prey on the public spheres of the mythical charter school that's taking all the kids away. We actually need to understand where students are going and why they're going there. And for us to continue to play on this narrative is just old and it's tired. And I know people think like, oh, I'm a charter guy or whatever. I've never defended charter schools. I've never advocated for charter schools. I don't That's not my job. I believe that we need to actually figure out in Minneapolis and own in Minneapolis what we need to be better at. And that's creating a better value proposition. And the data that we showed before is not creating a better data proposition or value proposition than any other district around us, right? Like students of color are not doing well anywhere in Minnesota, but they're doing especially worse in Minnesota or Minneapolis than they are in other places in Minnesota. So like, that's what we're contending with right now. And so I think that was really frustrating. Just a couple more things because they rattled them off quick last night. There was another narrative that was being played on like the CDD has failed. And look, it's very well documented. AEC supported the comprehensive district design. And people want to say the CDD has failed. It has hurt the district, all this stuff. It was always planned. This is year 2 of the CDD, year 2 that your kids might be going to a new school, whatever. It was always been in the cards that MPS was going to lose students for multiple years in a row before starting to rebound. And a big part of needing to rebound was improving the academic rigor. It wasn't about where students were going. It was about improving the academic rigor. And so we know that that is not coming into fruition yet, right? And that stuff takes time. And oh, by the way, we had a pandemic that played a huge role in schools being closed and played a huge role in whether students wanted to make the decision to stay in Minneapolis public schools and continue distance learning or go to other districts that had opened their doors much earlier. And oh, by the way, we had a strike that closed the district down for 3 weeks. And we know that thousands of families left the district to go to other schools because it wasn't tenable to keep missing school and to keep disrupting people's lives for that long. And so that we have to be honest about everything, even if it's not politically expedient, even if it upsets our friends about what our challenges are. And then finally, we heard, Director Jourdain say something along the lines of like, why don't we have street teams trying to recruit students back? Part of the reason why we don't have street teams is because we keep slashing the budget at Davis and we don't have a community engagement department that can knock on doors. We don't have a communications department that can put together tons of marketing materials to actually engage the Minneapolis community, to tell Minneapolis community to send their kids to Minneapolis public schools and tell them about all the awesome things that are actually happening in Minneapolis public schools. And then, again, I think Heather, you've mentioned this before, like what you're hearing in community is like, we don't have the rigor in Minneapolis public schools that we want to see. And so, whether that's a myth or whether that's real, like, that's a whole other discussion. But like, we have to be honest, and especially these folks who are running for office, who currently hold elected office, who know that information or need to know that information. Like, we have to be honest with the voting public about like what is actually happening in Minneapolis public schools. And the truth is, like, there's all this concern about Minneapolis losing students. We talked to several principals in the last 2 days who have said we have more students than we expected, right? Like, we have many more students than we expected. We're trying to figure out, how to stabilize staffing to make that work. And oh, by the way, we also have, we're making staffing work right now, and we're figuring that out pretty quickly too. So all these narratives that are being shared about Minneapolis public schools, when you're thinking you're trying to help Minneapolis public schools, you're actually harming Minneapolis public schools by sharing all these things by either one, confusing the problem, and two, just telling a negative story that's not really there. So that is my do better moment, and I will rest.
It was hard to hear it. And you're right. What we hear when we talk to parents and when we are in community, we don't hear those same things. And to have them spoken as if they are proven was really disheartening for me because that's not at all the experience that we have when we're talking to schools, when we're talking to teachers, and we're talking to families and community. I think that
What we
we
are hearing,
all
sorry, not to cut you off, but what we are hearing from schools and from teachers and principals is that more students are showing up than we expected. Um, we know that staffing is a challenge and it has been hard
everywhere.
everywhere, and we're making it work. We're making the staffing challenges work. We're filling vacancies. We're almost there. We feel confident that we'll get there to make our school buildings operate. Right? Like those are the three things that we've repeatedly heard. We ask every single principal, every single teacher that we're talking to, like, what's going on? How is it happening? And that's what they're saying. So I don't know. We can keep playing on this narrative to scare families, to scare teachers, to agitate, to have people just be mad and agitated. But we're just doing a disservice to the district as a whole by continuing to confuse the problem and continuing to, just create a negative story in Minneapolis public schools. The story that we need to be focusing on is back on that data that we saw. That is the story that we need to focus on, and that's what I mean when I say we just love to fight to fight. Like
Yep.
that's
Yep.
why do this?
Well, let's just say there was no way to make a short video about these complex issues.
Yeah, our
um, and
bad.
we by the way, we tried. Also thank you for just kind of letting us breathe through this. Um, the in the reality, you and I care about the things that we um, looked at last night could have each been their own board meeting, and we would have had as much to say about them. And the reality is, we got to get stuff done. So, thank you for taking the time. Thank you, as parents, for paying attention. Thank you, teachers, for being back to school and for covering some of those shortages. We see you. Thank you, front office staff. We see you. Thank you, bus drivers. We see you. But anyway, just so thankful for being back in. That was the other thing we are hearing. Thank you that we can be back in buildings and be together again. And I'm so hopeful as a parent that this stays that way. But yeah, long recap today. I was like, oh, we almost are just making a podcast.
Yeah. And about the EDIA, I'm just kidding. All right, let's wrap up. Let's just wrap up. All right. So thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.